Welcome to Best Decision Ever, where we believe that life comes down to very few moments and decisions. So on this show, we highlight the very people that have had the courage to start that company, make that career change, or just stand up for what they believe in. And on this show, we know that success is only one part of the story. So we dive into the challenges that these people have had to endure in order to get to their current point of success, so we can learn their mindsets and routines and apply them to our own lives. For those of you who are new though, my name is John and I'm your host. I think of myself as a performance enthusiast. I love sitting down with the people that are at the top of their game so I can learn from them and apply those lessons to my life. And today, we have a very special guest. She graduated from Harvard and went on to go work for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York during the financial crisis. She then decided to make a sudden career change and location change and go to Beijing to help Groupon scale internationally. Thereafter, she went and led Human Interest Sales Development Org, which was named one of Y Combinator's top 100 companies ever created. She's now the CEO and founder of Alariss Global, which is connecting international high-tech companies with the world's global workforce and fostering what they call globalization 3.0. Without further ado, we have Joyce Chang Gray. How are you today?
Doing very well, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Before we dive into what Alariss is, do you want to describe a little bit what globalization 3.0 is and why it matters?
Sure. Globalization 3.0 is the newest wave of globalization. If we think of the first wave as being more around colonialism or imperialism, and maybe the second wave is around trade relationships and kind of mostly still Western interests going east, or the global north going to the global south. Globalization 3.0 is more distributed, more egalitarian, and it's a lot more virtual. It's the exchange of goods and ideas and services all online, and it's what we see as a more equal distribution of resources, because now someone in the global south can also access things in the global north, and it's just coming full circle.
That is so interesting, and I really like the way you put it in the articles you've written about, of just how the work and the way that we think about outsourcing is really changing, where international companies are now looking to people even within the United States to highly skilled workers, salespeople, to go and hire them and really and have them be a part of really the global workforce and be a part of their company. With that said, how'd you get to starting Alariss, and where did that passion come from?
Well, in many ways, the passion came from just my entire life and upbringing. I'm the daughter of immigrants, so my parents are immigrants from China. I'm a second-generation immigrant. So growing up, I was lucky to speak Chinese at home, to have the perspectives of both American culture as well as other cultures. And I think I was just always really attuned to the differences and the diversity in the world, and also was just always looking for ways to bridge the divides, whether it was representing the US to friends and relatives in China, or the reverse when I was back here. And later on, I had the privilege of working all over the world representing global companies, and I was just fascinated by how broad and how many experiences I had overseas, and wanting to democratize that access so other people could get the same opportunities, even if they couldn't perhaps physically move. I knew that there were ways to still collaborate and to make really deep and meaningful connections. So I just saw this as a really blend of my own personal identity, of business needs that I saw, and of just this ambition and sense of adventure that many people in the US feel.
And just like what you said, why is it so important that people be connected on more of a global scale, and they don't just stay within maybe their own country, but they really branch out and have a better understanding of just what's going on in other countries? And so what I'm trying to say is, why is it important that people understand different countries and just work on a more global scale?
I think from a matter of just global, stability and having a more enriched and diverse global society and community, it's important to go outside of your comfort zone, to meet different people, and to connect on a people-to-people level and person-to-person level. But from a very tactical business standpoint, the reason that a lot of the companies we work with are excited to work with us is because they need to go global for talent acquisition, for client acquisition, for more resources. So for them, it's really an imperative when it comes down to just basic business. They want to go abroad for more revenue acquisition. And then on the other side, actually, the realization we had too, because I grew up in Michigan and my co-founder grew up in Wisconsin, people across the US don't have equal access to opportunity. If you're in the Midwest, you don't get paid as much doing the same job as someone who lives in California or New York. And we wanted to change that. So we thought, well, there's on one side of the ocean, let's say an international company yearning to break into the US and trying to get access to the world's top economy and to be seen as a global player and not just a domestic player. And in the US, there are people who really want to see their global maxima as far as how much they can get paid and what opportunities they have, and not just be limited to where they live and what their, you know, their physical location or physical geography would provide. So it just seemed like a great opportunity to connect people. And the reason we love this is because it's a business need that speaks to human needs, and it also creates these meaningful interactions where people have interests aligned and where they can actually forge these bonds, both professional and personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like those professional and personal bonds are obviously really important. And do you mind talking a little bit more about just how your entrepreneurial journey started and how you've really created bonds globally through just the different work you've done? You didn't just start, you know. Obviously, I know we talked about Ogre when you were in Harvard, but then you went on to work for, you know, the Federal Reserve, and you went on to go in and work internationally. You mind talking about like the path that you've gone on and how you built connections all the way along to get to where you are?
Sure. So Ogre was one grain of rice, yes. OGOR. Yeah. And it was kind of the startup concept that I had with one of my friends way back in the day in college, where it was really just an extension of student groups. Like, we loved international travel, and it was basically, we called it like the Peace Corps, but for private companies. So getting young people who would otherwise have volunteered with the Peace Corps abroad, but instead of having them go teach English, they would go volunteer and work for different companies in different places. Because even at the time we thought, well, what many of these countries need is economic development and growth. They don't necessarily need just purely volunteerism. And so that was one part of the equation. Another part was, in college I actually got involved with, at the time it was called an early stage social enterprise, and I think nowadays people would say it was an ed tech company. It was a company founded that helped connect students in Asia to students in the US for peer-to-peer mentorship.
That's so cool. Okay.
Over webcam.
Yeah.
And this was before Zoom, and this was before even, you know, before laptops even had embedded cameras, or maybe some of them did, but it was an extension that you had to like plug in, and this Logitech external camera that was super grainy. It was really bad fidelity but it was like the OG, you know, online kind of education or online.
You guys were like ahead of the curve, man.
Way ahead of the curve. The company didn't stay afloat. It shut down, but it sometimes goes to show that good ideas, when it's a little bit early and when the technology is not quite there, might not work out. But fast forward, I mean, now so much is done in the future of work, and so much is done virtually and globally. But those two experiences were really formative for me in kind of combining my love of international relations and also my interest in technology and business, and realizing that there is a way to blend it all. Because, you know, I truly do believe that government has a really strong and important role in economic development and in safeguarding our democracy, which is why I worked for the Federal Reserve, why I've done other work with government. But at the same time, government can only do so much. There's a freedom of movement. There is like a speed of execution that only startups can have, and there was something really exciting about starting my own startup.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's really cool about your journey is you're pulling from so many different experiences and so many different just like different like learning, like just lessons you've had. Like you had what you did in college, and then you went and worked abroad. Like, how important is it for people, especially maybe it's like a young founder or maybe young tech professionals, to really work to like have more diverse experiences, just versus like a very straight career path of, and there's nothing wrong with like climbing up a company or playing whatever game, but how important is it to have like a diverse set of experiences?
I think it's personal preference sometimes, but one statistic that always stood out to me is that I think maybe it's even now, I forget when the study was done, but basically 83% of jobs that exist today didn't exist 2 decades ago. And if you think about it, even, you know, I worked at the Fed, and we worked in the New York Fed. We had this like amazing building, and it looks like a fortress. It modeled after an Italian castle, or it was meant to look like strength and fortitude. And on the first floor, you see a lot of these windows, which are former bank teller windows. They're not used anymore because the New York Fed no longer has to have people who count money, you know, bill by bill. They're transacting billions, trillions of dollars, and there is definitely something that you don't do by paper anymore. But it just goes to show how quickly technology changes and how quickly job descriptions change. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to constantly learn, to be lifelong learners, and to evolve and adapt with the time. But also, I think for any job or career, it's hard to stay motivated if you don't inherently love it. Yeah. And I know it comes from a place of privilege to say that, but there are people who just get burned out if they work for something that they don't care about, period. And if you have the ability to learn and to grow and to do things that align with your own values and your own interests, then pursue them. And so for me, part of that was just international relations. And because I really was passionate about it, I spent a lot of my free time as well as my professional time trying to get that broad range of experiences with different people from different cultures, because that was just part of who I was and part of what I loved. But I think if I didn't love it, then there was no need to try to seek out diversity for the sake of it, and to also put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable or where it won't matter to you in the future.
Yeah, and it seems like then understanding the starting story of Alariss, like more granularly, having you talked about it in interviews, it was like, I think you said, like, a friend called you and said, hey, like, we need someone to work for this international company, can you help us? And it was like a very natural, like, you've had all these experiences, all of a sudden there was a need and you kind of filled it. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. I think that sometimes people will talk about, like, startup clubs nowadays at schools, and those are great because some people just want to be entrepreneurs, but it's also really hard to start something from scratch if you don't know anything about the problem, if you have never experienced or talked to the customers, or you yourself are not really deeply embedded in the solution. So I think that was one of the most natural ways. I knew I was interested in international relations, international business, and tech. At the time, I wasn't quite sure how that all came together, but that natural pull of a friend, in this case, one who became a customer, actually coming forward with a true problem and saying, I don't know how to solve this problem, but because you're American, you're in the US, you understand both Chinese culture and American culture, perhaps you can help us solve it. And that problem was what to me at the time seemed really simple, but I think that's the beauty of having diverse friends, because it might be simple to me as an American, but is really difficult for someone in another country, just as the same problem in reverse would have felt insurmountable to me. And that problem was simply, how can I get someone to work for my team? I am in China. I want to build a global company. I want to build a global team. I don't have a network in the US other than people like you who can maybe help me. And that was kind of the genesis of a lot of what became Alariss.
And as I understand it, you were starting it as a consultancy, right? You had a startup with your current co-founder before, and you were going to you were pondering, as I understand it, was it going to be a consultancy? Is it not? And you really had to work through, like, hey, can I really do this? Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yes. So for the consulting angle, it's because I think one thing that is great about consulting, or one could call it consulting, it's just basically finding a problem people have and getting paid to solve it. Because you know that people will pay for that problem, the solution that you're offering. Whereas sometimes building a product before you've identified it, it's almost like you're a hammer looking for a nail, as they say. So in this case, I knew there was a problem. I didn't really know what the product exactly would look like, but I started to do things that were very manual at first. And then as I did it manually, I was also simultaneously trying to survey the market to see, well, how repeatable is the problem? And therefore, how repeatable is the solution? And as I started to build up more and more people, as I talked to more potential customers, then it became apparent, well, this is a really huge problem, and it's one that I'm uniquely positioned to solve. And then on the other hand, figuring out the solution, like, what does that look like? Am I the one who is going to be the chief revenue officer for all these companies looking to launch in the US? Well, that's not scalable. That solution or product as a person is just consulting. But what part of me and what part of what I'm doing is scalable and is transferable or repeatable? And that's how I started to really, first do it in a very manual way, create a website, start making a lot of matches manually, and then later on scale it. And then, of course, my co-founder, Nick, who's our CTO, built a great product that can allow a lot more scalability of this. But ultimately, it has to come down to just very fundamental things. What is the pain point? How strong is it? Are people willing to pay for it? How much? And can you sustain the solution you have with the amount, and then keep on doing it over and over again?
And what was it like for more of like the mental side of actually thinking about, man, I'm going to actually start this company and build this thing up? Like, was that something that was a really easy transition? Like you just had the confidence to go do it and you just did it? Or was that something you kind of had to build up and really get yourself to like grasp it? Hey, I'm really going to start this company and like, you know, take it more big time, or make something bigger than just consulting?
I think in college I'd thought about starting something because I was part of a startup before, and even with the mock-up of Ogre, I thought like this would be a really fun company to start, but I couldn't really see a path to financial viability because even at the time, the way I conceived of Ogre was as a nonprofit, like nonprofit sending people, instead of the Peace Corps, again, they go abroad to volunteer or to work at these companies. But later on, I think I started getting more and more confidence, both because I was part of big companies where I could learn from managers and mentors. I started to learn best practices. I think being part of a bigger, more established company is great for just a training ground. And then joining a startup as the first employee right after they finished Y Combinator, that was really an aha moment where I realized, like, well, I've been here from almost day one, and I can go through at least the mechanics of figuring out the repeatable sales process, of building the playbook, of hiring the team. So I felt a lot more emboldened, and I think I was very lucky to have gone to great schools and have these networks where people were very encouraging and were also willing to give me a lot of advice. And I felt like even if it doesn't work out, I would regret more not doing this.
Yes, yeah.
And that is a framework that I often use. It's like, which decision would you regret not making? I would regret not having tried to start a company at a time when I had enough financial buffer, I had an idea, I had like the risk appetite to do it. And those moments don't come all the time. No. So I'm glad I did, but it took a lot of buildup, and it took some courage. It took some courage accrual.
So to go do it, yeah. So this will be interesting. Then this will be a little more tactical, but I think this will be very, very cool to go into. Would you have like a checklist when you're making big decisions of like, okay, like this is a checklist to go through to make sure that like I'm going with, like, some people are like, hey, just go with your gut, whatever. But like, do you have like more of like a process people can take and go, okay, this is how I make bigger decisions, more life-changing decisions?
I think that, so it's not necessarily a pure framework I use for every decision, but I think oftentimes it's, I have either a mental or even a physical, like, pros and cons list. That's one, but also just like what I'm prioritizing or optimizing and how I would weight those things. And so that also changes based on stage in life. Like early on, I think in my career, I was optimizing a lot more for stability, for learning, for having things where, and also for the impact. I think that's always been very top line. Like that's one, so there are some things that are just non-negotiable. Like, is this an organization or company where I feel like I have positive impact and I'd feel proud to represent this brand or this organization? And if not, like, it doesn't really matter how much they would pay me or how, how much it fulfilled some of my other, the other qualities I looked for. If it didn't meet the just pure table stakes, then I wouldn't do it. And then there are other things like, okay, will this at least afford me a certain level of financial stability? Is this one that I will, be able to later on, like, learn a lot from and advance in my career from? That mattered a lot more earlier on in my career. And then later, I didn't care as much. But I think back to, my college days or post-college, and I remember how much, the brand of the company I worked for really mattered. I don't think that at that time I would have ever wanted to, let's say, start my own company because I was so terrified of people not taking it seriously, of people not giving me enough credit.
Okay.
But also, I think the landscape of entrepreneurship has changed, and it's changed pretty quickly in just a short amount of time. Now there's a little bit of a badge of honor for being an entrepreneur. Maybe that'll change again down the road. It just, the markets ebb and flow. But at the time, I didn't feel as if being a failed entrepreneur was something that that I could really recover from very easily. So I would rather first have a stable career where I could prove that I was capable, and then later I could take a bunch of risks, and even if it failed, no one would ever criticize me for not having the capability to do a job well.
Interesting. And would you, so it sounds like for you, just a couple of things. So when you're making a big decision, first and foremost, it's for you, it's like, hey, mission, is there some financial stability in it? Am I going to enjoy doing what I'm doing? But then for you, it sounded like there was like an evolution in your career of, first you wanted to optimize for learning, growing, and like financial growth, and you were very focused on, hey, how can I work for quality brands, still do something I enjoy, but starting a company was kind of on the back burner.
Right. And then later on, I think I started optimizing more and more for executing, giving back, contributing, because I felt like I'd learned a lot. I felt that I'd been, so lucky and fortunate to have mentorship and to have seen best practices of management, and I really wanted to then in turn put those into practice for myself. And I also thought, like, this is a pretty unique time. There are a lot of studies, actually. Stanford has these studies where they look at unicorn founders and what's the average age or how many startups. So it's not actually people who are straight out of college or college dropouts. The average age for unicorn founders is actually people in their 30s and people who have tried and failed to have a startup before. So in many ways, I was actually right in the sweet spot of people, because I guess perhaps if I were to dig into the data, part of it is if you're too early in your career, you might not have either the networks or perhaps the capability or the understanding of the problem space or of the customer to know enough about what you don't know. And sometimes it's hard to just build things from scratch and execute and hire the right team right off the bat. And perhaps a bit later on, when people have a lot of experience, there's a higher risk intolerance because they have a mortgage, they have to pay for college tuition, and all these other things happen. And also, being an entrepreneur is pretty grueling. Like the lifestyle, the hours, sometimes the constant stress is pretty taxing. So I don't think it's for everyone. I do think that there is a sweet spot, at least for me personally, where I felt like, okay, I was past the initial stage where I didn't know what I was doing, and I'm not yet at the stage where I don't want to, have to hustle and grind. So this was the right time for me to start a company.
And thinking about the challenges of being an entrepreneur, a CEO, what have been one of the biggest challenges that you didn't expect in being a founder?
I guess I'd heard about it, but obviously it's one thing to hear about it. It's another thing to experience it. I think it's just sometimes it can feel very untethered because you're literally creating something out of nothing. It's by your own will and your own forcing, your own sort of, drive and motivation that it happens. So even minute things, like every single decision was up for debate, every single product feature, every single pricing, the way, not just pricing, like how do you price your product, but what is the product and how do you describe it? And do you price it in a recurring way? Do you price it in how open and transparent are you with pricing? Do you benchmark it to one thing or another? There's a million different small decisions that come with the details and the tactical decisions you have to make. And I think I knew that would happen, but I don't think I fully appreciated before I did it how much uncertainty there would be and how much learning and constant readjustment would happen. But sometimes part of the learning as well is when do you stop adjusting? When do you stop just taking in information and you just say, okay, this might be wrong, but I'm just going to do it, and then I'm going to quickly take in that data and then I will readjust. And when do you say I'm not going to readjust anymore? Because you could try to please everyone and try to make all these tweaks and refinements, but you just have to make a decision and commit to it. So all these things are just very amorphous until you start to create some solid structure around it yourself.
And at what point did you develop the conviction in yourself to where you can make those decisions of, hey, you know what, we're just going to go with this. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but did you always have that conviction, or is that something you just kind of had to develop and work on?
I think it's still an ongoing process. Okay. I mean, all the time I'm still reminding myself of the conviction, and I think it's one of the things that's great is that I so believe in this problem space and in what we're doing is genuinely good and genuinely bringing value to our customers. So that keeps me going. But there have been multiple times where I thought, gosh, how long should I keep doing this and, spending my own money, or I feel kind of guilty because I'm not spending as much time with family as I should, or at a certain point it's, there's a huge opportunity cost of the salary I could be earning or other things. And if I really care this much about the mission, maybe I should just go back to a multilateral organization or join the UN or something like that. Do I really have to do my own startup and keep pushing on this? And there are always these moments of self-doubt, and I think that every founder goes through moments of incredible loneliness and like second guessing, like they would be lying if they didn't. And of course, usually founders will present the best of everything. It's like all the rocket ship emojis, all the, LinkedIn posts about
rocket ship emoji,
like, the LinkedIn posts about, oh, I'm so honored that. So from the surface, it can feel like, oh, that person's always known what he or she wanted to do. They just are crushing it. Everything is smooth sailing, and it's not like that. Every founder has had like peaks of great victory and troughs of despair where they feel like it's not worth doing, either because, luckily we've never been in this position because my co-founder and I are very financially prudent and very conscious about what the payroll is because, for example, I know that the people that we employ, I want to make sure that I can guarantee them a job, and I want to make sure that we can keep them employed for as long as they'd like to be with a company. And that means making sure that we have enough run rate, either through, investor money or through our clients, that we're not making brash decisions. But not every founder, operates their company in that way. And there are a lot of stories of people who just hire massively and then have these massive layoffs. And then there's, a roller coaster of emotions that go into that. And then other people who might not be able to make payroll. So then the founder has to put down their own credit card to do it. So there are all sorts of things where I think it's the most incredible privilege to have other people entrust you with their careers. And it's one that it's a responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. But it does come with its own stress because you're not just trying to do things for yourself anymore. You're trying to make sure that you do the right thing by your team.
Mm-hmm. And keeping those challenges in mind, how do you stay motivated? Like, what do you do just to keep yourself moving and keep like a positive? You have a great energy about you, by the way. You just are very positive, and like how do you stay that way?
I think for me, and this goes back to the previous point that we were talking about, which is you have to be genuinely passionate about what you're doing. And that's why I feel lucky to have founded a company in this space. But it's also why we have great founder market fit, because arguably no one else would have the combination of the depth of experience and the passion and understanding and the connections and resources to make this complex two-sided marketplace and global expansion product really come to life. So because I've lived and breathed this problem and the solution for arguably my entire life, I stay very motivated because this is really core to my identity. And not every founder is like that. That's just for me personally. So I know that if it weren't for us, a lot of the relationships that are matched and made and continued on our platform wouldn't have existed. And I know that if it weren't for us, a lot of people would be judged based on their country of origin or the accent that they have or where the perception is of, their headquarters, and that's just not fair. And so there is a feeling of motivation because I know what we're doing is valuable. We have people that are already using our product, and so I wouldn't want to let them down. And I have a team that I really believe in and trust, and who trust me, and so I wouldn't want them to be let down either. But more so than that fear of letting people down is also the excitement and the energy around creating something new, about building an ever-scaling and ever more successful organization. And my goal is to build a brand that lasts for generations. So not just to make a quick flip or, have it get acqui-hired or whatever it is that other people might anchor towards. It's really to create a lasting brand that exists and becomes the global leader in this cross-border or international expansion space, which is still a blue ocean. Like, though people have been doing this ever since, I guess, the days of, the early settlers or colonies, it's never been done in such a tech scalable way as now.
Mm-hmm. And that's what seems really exciting. So then, keeping that big picture in mind, how do you define success for yourself? And has that changed over time?
Success it has changed over time. I think when I was younger, I think success was around getting A's in school, let's say, because when you're a kid, you don't really know that's part of your goal. It's like study, work hard, do well in school, and those are the KPIs that you're accountable for. But now, as I guess an adult, I know that success is pretty self-defined. And success for me is a combination of having, just being a very positive contributor to society. However that's defined, it doesn't have to be lofty, it just has to be something positive, of being a good mother, good wife, good sister, good family member, just a good person. And then building and running, and at this point, my success professionally is building and running a world-class organization. Mm-hmm. And we'll continue to iterate on that definition of success.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like for you that success has evolved, but really boils down to, are you making a positive impact on the world?
Yes, I think so. You have a great way of synthesizing a lot of information into succinct sound bites, John.
I'll take it. Thank you. With all that in mind, what would you say? You've done a lot. You've traveled the world. I think you said you visited 90 countries. Like you've done more in a lifetime, and then more than like 2 or 3 people. What would you say has been your best decision ever so far?
Oh gosh, the best decision. I mean, I would have to say like marrying my husband and starting a family. It would still have to be right up there in the best decisions.
And what makes you say that?
It is something that is very fulfilling on a personal level, and it is a decision because I didn't make the decision about when I would be born, but I get to make the decision in other like very substantial ways, and it's something that is profoundly impactful and transformative for me. And so, I think that people can decide. Not everyone wants to decide to have a family, and that's totally fine. But for me, it was a great decision, and I'm very glad of it.
Mm-hmm. I think I like that you said that. It's something different. A lot of people, it's within the realm of career. That says a lot about you. So I very much appreciate that. So like kind of like changing the tables a little bit. Like what do you do? Like what do you do for fun? Like when you're just trying to like relax and just unwind, or just like get out of work. Like what do you do? Yeah, just to relax and just have some fun.
So I actually, and this might sound sort of funny, but certain parts of work are really fun and relaxing to me. But this is why I'm perhaps not everyone is like this, but because I kind of lived and breathed this problem state, it's always been very fun for me. Like even in my free time, I like to travel, I like to meet other people, I like to learn other languages. So sometimes I find it fun, like even little things that feel serendipitous, like figuring out a common connection, even though it's someone who lives across the world, or pronouncing someone's name the right way and seeing their eyes light up and they're like, oh my gosh, how did you know that? And I would just have to say, oh, I spent some time in Ljubljana before. They're like, what? No one's ever been to Ljubljana, or things like that. It's just little things I just find really fun and rewarding. But I mean, obviously that's still in the context of work. Outside of work, I mean, I like to meet up with friends. I like to go on hikes. I like to go swimming, like, all the, I guess, typical hobbies that other people would have. But I think that finding surprise and delight in work, it just no longer feels like work. I get to work. My co-founder is one of my best friends. Mm-hmm. We trust each other so much. We still hang out even with our other friends. Our partners are good friends with each other. We have the same social group, and we don't get sick of each other. We don't get sick of it because it feels like fun. And I think you just have to keep that in mind, because I guess the path of a founder can be so grueling, and it can be very emotionally draining. And if you don't keep that sense of fun and discovery and some amount of optimism, it can really, it can just be very demoralizing. So I always try to find a little bit of that spark in everything that I do. Yes,
I absolutely love that. This is actually something we haven't talked about a little bit before we wrap up. I'm curious, how have you? So from my understanding, you and your co-founder, I believe, met at Harvard, right? And then how have you like developed and kept that relationship really solid? I know for a lot of founders who are either watching or just in general, like it's challenging to find a co-founder, but then to keep a good relationship with them. I think it's alluded to as like dating, how have you kept that relationship going?
So when we first met in college, I don't think either of us ever imagined that, a decade and a half later we'd be founding a company together. But at the time it was just like, we just enjoyed hanging out. We had a lot of mutual friends. We had shared interests. We traveled to China together. He actually spent an entire year studying abroad at Peking University, and my family's originally from Beijing. So, we met up in China. My family took him out to Hot Pot. So cool. We have traveled all around the world with other friends and just with each other to about 13 different countries, including, Cuba and Tunisia and the Philippines. Like, he was stationed as a diplomat in Taipei and Tunis, and so I got to visit. So it was just a lot of fun. Like, again, this is why I keep on bringing up fun, because the two of us just always loved having positive impact and being part of public service, also being part of these international and global organizations, meeting other people. We just had a lot of enjoyment from that, like genuine enjoyment. And even in the early days of Alariss, when we were running this as more a consultancy and we were trying to figure out product market fit, we would like go to a conference. We went to like a conference in Dubai that we got invited to and got free tickets for. And on the way, we're like, ooh, let's do a layover in Kuwait. And so we ended up going to Kuwait and other things. We had zero business reason to be in Kuwait, but we just wanted to go because we love traveling and we love meeting new people, and met up with a friend there and tried to like, you know, do a little bit of diligence and say like, oh, how can we get plugged into the, you know, venture scene in Kuwait and things like that. It's just, the relationship was just very natural to maintain. So I feel incredibly lucky because I know not everyone has that. Yeah. And it's also, you know, finding someone who is so aligned with you in terms of mission and vision and ambition and also timing. It wouldn't have worked out if one of us was, you know, working full time at a corporate job and didn't want to quit, and the other person wanted to start something right then and there. So we just had a really great confluence of things. But we'd kept in touch all these years, and I think because of the longevity of our friendship and also the ways in which we traveled, and you know, we've definitely had disagreements while we traveled. It's not like everything when you spend that much time with someone and you have very different personalities and itineraries that you don't have a little bit of disagreement, but we figured out ways to overcome them. And I think that when we work together, we have found that it's very natural for us to resolve any disagreements in a very like empathetic and a very respectful way, and we just trust each other completely.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like, again, shared values, shared missions, shared impact, and obviously timing. Is there, just for fun, is there a story traveling that you guys have like disagree? Is there something that stands out, like a disagreement, like traveling? Because traveling can get kind of icky when you're traveling across the world. Is there a story that stands out?
I think one of our most perhaps tense travel experiences was when we went to Cuba. Okay. We went on a people-to-people, you know, visa, but the two of us went, and when we showed up, so I had brought euros because I knew that you couldn't exchange US dollars, and he brought US dollars and wasn't able to exchange his currency. And so then also in Cuba, it's at the time, and I think still now, you can't use a lot of your ATM cards or credit cards or anything like that. You're supposed to show up with the cash that you're going to use, and you can't like change your itinerary or anything like that. So, you know, basically we were going to be there for a week on half the budget we had initially planned. And so the beginning of it was obviously like, I'm annoyed because I'm like, well, this was something that was avoidable. And then we later on would kind of disagree about certain budgetary things. Like I would want to like walk for 2 or 3 miles to save money on like a cab, and he would say, well, that's kind of ridiculous because then we're going to miss out on all these other things. And you know, there were other incidents like that. We look back on it now and we laugh, but at the time I remember we had quite a few disagreements when we had differing opinions about how to spend our very, very meager resources.
That is so awesome. That's a great story. I'm happy you guys made it out okay. Before we ask the final question, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they learn more about Alariss? Yeah, so please go to our website. I think I'm wearing the shirt, alariss.com, ALARISS.com, and my email is just joyce@alariss.com, or, you know, I'm on Twitter, we're on Facebook and LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is actually the social media channel that I use the most nowadays. I'm not very good at Twitter, but I do have a lot of people that I connect with on LinkedIn because it's just easier since we're there. Okay, awesome. So final question. What advice would you give to someone that is on the other side of a big decision? Maybe they want to travel across the world and change jobs. Maybe they want to start a company, or maybe they just want to begin writing a blog that they're passionate about and they're afraid to. What advice would you give to someone? It is about, you know, this is your one guaranteed life. I say guaranteed because, you know, some people do believe in reincarnation and others, but this is your one life right now to live. And what would be something that you would regret later on? Because if you are at a crossroads right now, if you don't take that path, if it closes off, then what would you regret? So, but also, of course, do it in a responsible way. Do it in a way in which you know that if it failed and if it didn't work out, you wouldn't feel crushing defeat. You would have some way in which you could still salvage the experience and say, well, at least I learned a lot from it. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, that's fine because at least I have a great safety net of friends and family who will let me crash on their couch when I have no money. So whatever it is, don't
run yourself into financial ruin. You know, I was VP of sales at a fintech company where we preached financial security. So always have that emergency buffer and put money into your 401k, all that good stuff.
Very fair. So it sounds like for you, it's take intelligent risk. So, you know, you're only going to have one life, but make sure that the risk you take, you know, you really think through it.
Right.
Awesome.
Exactly. John, you're so good at this.
You're such a good host. Stop. We're going to have to cut that out. But anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for the time. It's been awesome. Guys, please make sure, take the lessons you've learned here, apply them to your own life. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.